Clearly, the economic, political, and social landscape that surrounds and sustains healthcare right now and healthcare delivery is undergoing rapid change like we've never seen before. You voted for change last fall. We didn't know what that meant at the time, but again, that change is challenging us, and new approaches to accountability are being thrown at us, new interests in how we operate. And as this process unfolds, what we're finding is that professionals in healthcare philanthropy have to really be ready to assume more assertive roles than what we've had in the past. One of my favorite writers, Mark Twain, reminded us about San Francisco. He asserted that the coldest winter he'd ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. And it seems that at least the coastal side of San Francisco will warm up about the same time cooler air moves into the rest of the world. And it's part of what we're seeing in this upside-down, inside-out weather pattern is very much like what we're experiencing in the state of play relative to healthcare and healthcare reform. What we used to be able to count on is gone. What we expected is reversed. We have an awful lot of ambiguity to deal with, and it is oftentimes very confounding to us. At the same time, the economic stresses are forcing many development officers, I would maintain mistakenly, to cut back on staffing and fundraising programs, while the institutions we support are postponing or even canceling plans to expand or upgrade facilities. There's more pressure on philanthropy than we've ever seen before. And I've heard from many of you around the country, throughout Canada, that, ambiguity, uncertainty are the watchwords right now. And again, very unsettling. How in the world can healthcare philanthropy flourish in this atmosphere? And I learned this a little bit, or it caught fire with me last week. I was having breakfast about 6:15 at a dive in a West Coast capital city on Main Street called Chicken Ruth's. At 6:15 in the morning, I haven't had coffee yet. I'm sitting at the counter. And the young man who's waiting on me is, coffee, coffee, coffee. And I said to him offhandedly, how are you doing today? How are you? And he looked at me and said, hey man, I'm living the dream. Here I am in Annapolis. I'm working with my friends. We're up early. We're here at 5 o'clock, 5:15. Everybody I work with is sober. We're focused. And I'm out of here by lunchtime. I am living the dream. And he meant it. He was serious. He was turned on by this. So I want to ask you in three different ways, how can we live the dream that we know we have or we can create in an atmosphere with uncertainty over healthcare reform and the economy? We face some very real prospect of major and lasting changes in healthcare and the reform that's coming about. Even more uncertainty looms over the question of how to pay for this reform without making deficits even larger. In Canada, privatization continues to creep upwards in response to the principle articulated by the Supreme Court that states or says access to a waiting list is not access to health care. And it's something that our Canadian brethren really face. They understand that. While they're facing that issue, we're finding that federal support there for provincial health care is going downwards. So they're really caught in a vice not unlike what we're doing. Also, the incoming head of the Canadian Medical Association, and Pearl helped me with her name, but it's Anne Duig, I believe. Duig, thank you, Anne, or Pearl. Just last month, she made an assertion, publicly picked up, that in Canada the system is imploding, it's unsustainable in its current form. Now, does that sound familiar with what we're going through? Not just in the United States either. We've studied other healthcare delivery programs around the world, whether it's Germany, UK, Australia, Japan. No one has all of the resources to provide the care that we are capable of providing. And it is a conundrum that we have to really take to heart. Of course, looming over all the concerns about change in our healthcare system is the question of the economy. We're now hearing that at least technically, I love this is coming out of Washington, D.C., by the way, but at least technically, the recession is or will soon be over. And whether this technical recovery is true or will be sustainable remains to be seen. So you may find that staying level in our philanthropy this year is really the new up. But we don't know how long this recovery is going to be able to be sustained at the level playing field. We shall see. The second thing I want to ask you is, how can we live the dream that we want to create? How can we live the dream in an atmosphere of uncertainty over philanthropy trends and resources that we're facing, the lack of them? Our own AHP giving report for the fiscal year 2008 definitely showed giving declines in the United States and Canada very clearly. Projections for 2009 and 2010 are less than positive. That's Washington speak for they're also negative, all right? And further out, they remain unclear. Philanthropy Giving Index, which we do each year with the Center on Philanthropy, and we are getting the attitudes, the projection of your concerns and attitudes of our members 6 months in advance, have really been down almost 30% relative to the level of confidence in the future 6 months. So while this economic crisis may be or is flattened out, I'm not so sure it's true with the world that we're dealing with, particularly in our business. It also appears that foundation giving will decline further, largely because of the hits that they've taken in their investments. As for the ability of state and local governments, we often think we need to turn to them, or even the federal government, but certainly state and local governments to contribute. Well, the shrinking value of homes and the tax base that's lost locally is creating crunches that we're just not going to come back from. It's knocking out the ability of local governments to raise money. So we're seeing, if you look at the papers, we are seeing, you may be living some of the communities where you're having furloughs of people that provide normal services in your community. The very thread of what we're all about in both countries, in all of our countries. State governments also are struggling to balance budgets, maintain existing services. Yet the need to raise significant philanthropic sums has not diminished. In fact, it's increased. And we see this in these kinds of economic conditions. For example, in 1990, the average physical plant in a hospital in the United States was less than 8 years old. Less than 8 years old. During the 1990s and into the early years of this century, our studies report, and we know, that there's a flurry of hospital construction activity. It's bonds, it's philanthropy that's contributing. And we're making these expansions and improvements possible through philanthropy and other sources as well. Despite this building boom, what we've found is that the average age of a hospital facility has actually increased 25%. We're now at 10 years and beyond in the age of those facilities. So we're going backwards. Even with this influx of what we've been providing, it's not enough. And it's not keeping us on the cutting edge. How does that appeal to donors? It's the strange things we have to be concerned with. 85% of the CEOs in the United States are telling us they are so concerned about our ability to raise capital that they can't really sustain what they had planned just 5 years ago. Very challenging for us. Also, our report on giving clearly shows that construction and renovation projects are among the greatest beneficiaries of healthcare philanthropy in the United States, followed by equipment purchases, community benefit programs, and operations. In Canada, almost half of the donated dollars generally go toward buying new equipment because it's not paid for by the government, followed by support for construction and renovation, research, and teaching. So we see that, again, we have that mix of what we're doing philanthropically, but what's the overall impact going to be when we have these crunches and the concern because of the economy? These needs are not going to disappear. That's very clear. No matter what healthcare reform takes, no matter what it looks like. They won't disappear even in Canada, as the government is reversing its declining financial support for provinces. And while they're reversing it, it's not enough. They're trying to inject more, but it's not keeping up with the needs.